Good evening. I'm Steve Spriester from beautiful Trinity University, not far from downtown and actually not that far from San Antonio Police Headquarters, the site of many police union news conferences, the site of protests this summer in the name of George Floyd and others. There's passion on both sides of this issue, and tonight is all about Proposition B and policing, about contracts and confusion.
Please, I can't breathe.
On a street corner, a man yells, "I can't breathe."
He's not responsive right now, bro.
On a street corner, a cruiser patrols with the vow of all police officers inscribed on its side to protect and serve. On a street corner, a protester asks for justice, transparency, and accountability. Street scenes that are all part of a debate over San Antonio's Proposition B, born out of the death of George Floyd on a Minneapolis street that led to marchers on San Antonio's.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Of a desire to hold bad officers responsible for their actions, to, in the name of their own organization, Fix SAPD. On the other side, those who put their lives on the line every shift they put on a badge. Those who answer the call for help. A proud union that won its contracts at the negotiating table and on San Antonio streets. Negotiations are where they say this disagreement should be decided, not the ballot box. Who's right in this debate will ultimately be decided by those who call San Antonio home. And tonight, a discussion to help you decide.
Every group has the right to make their voices heard.
This is for accountability at the end of the day.
Should Prop B pass? The debate starts right now. Welcome to Laurie Auditorium at Trinity University. There are no students here. As a matter of fact, there's no crowd, a largely empty auditorium due to ongoing COVID protocols on campus. But we are very glad to have this venue for our discussion tonight. And we thank Trinity University, the administration, and the great staff that helped us put on tonight's event. A discussion, a debate, a forum, whatever you call it, what we're going to be focusing on tonight is one idea that San Antonio voters will get to weigh in on. Proposition B. Should the police union still get to collectively bargain with the city on their union contracts? It is something we will discuss in depth tonight. There will be no time limits. The moderators will just make sure we move this discussion along. And with that in mind, let's meet the participants. First off, my co-moderator, I'm pleased to be joined tonight by Iris Dimmick, who is senior reporter with the San Antonio Report. She's done numerous stories on Proposition B. She and I will be asking the questions and, as I said, moving the discussion along. We'll have final statements at the end of the debate, and each side will have 1 minute for those. Now let's meet those taking part in this debate. To my right, from the San Antonio Police Officers Union Association, Sergeant Rachel Barnes, one of the negotiators in the city and police union's ongoing contract negotiations. On my left, representing the Fix SAPD group that was instrumental in getting Prop B on the ballot and has been actively campaigning for its passage, Mr. James Dykeman. I would also like to introduce a third person who's part of this discussion, City Manager City Attorney Andy Segovia. I almost gave you
I got promoted.
I almost gave you a promotion there. City Attorney Andy Segovia. There will no doubt be some legal questions and definitions that will come up and questions about what this could mean for the city. So it's good to have Mr. Segovia here. And Andy, will you just clarify what you think your role is as part of this discussion?
Thank you, Steve. And as you can see, I don't have a referee jersey on, so I'm not playing that role. Under law, the city can't take a position on Prop B, either advocate for it or advocate against it. What we can do is provide objective facts and analysis in terms of what Prop B means for the city and for the union and for the community. So hopefully I can give you some of those objective facts that will help facilitate the discussion.
Yeah, we look forward to that. Thank you for being here, Mr. Segovia. As I said off the top, Prop B on the May ballot is about contracts. When you read the ballot, though, the language is not quite clear, and that's part of the reason for the confusion. It reads, quote, City of San Antonio Proposition B. repeal of the adoption of the state law applicable to City of San Antonio police officers that establishes collective bargaining. If a majority of the affected employees favor representation by an employees association, preserves the prohibition against strikes and lockouts, and provides penalties for strikes and lockouts. Voters will choose for or against. That's as clear as mud. With a further explanation of exactly what Prop B does, here's Iris Dimmick.
Well, and hopefully this will help this kind of more plain English, though it is still very complicated. So if approved by voters, Proposition B would repeal Chapter 174 of the Texas Local Government Code, which gives the police power to collectively bargain for a labor contract. That contract covers everything from discipline to wages, healthcare benefits, and more. Chapter 174 was actually originally adopted by San Antonio voters in 1974, and we're the only major city in Texas that has done so. Other cities use meet and confer process, which is a whole other concept on its own, so we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. Let's get to the first question right off the bat. I'm going to give this question to both you, Rachel, and you, James. Rachel, I'll start with you. You prefer Rachel instead of Sergeant. Okay. What does collective bargaining mean to SAPOA, and why do they want to keep it the way it is?
Well, collective bargaining to us, it's a tool. It's a tool that allows us to ensure that the city is going to provide the things that the officers need to make sure that they can do their jobs effectively and efficiently. And I'm talking about things like good working conditions, safe equipment, stuff like that. When we can do our job effectively, that means the residents get their safe streets that they love so much. It's also a tool for recruitment for us. We want to attract the best candidates across the country. And when they come and look at the benefits and the great department we have the best department in the country. When they come and see that, they come from all over and apply for our department, and that's what we need to keep good officers here in San Antonio serving the community. It's also a tool for reform. We use collective bargaining. We go to the table and we talk to the city so we can get the reforms that the city needs and the city asks for. And we listen. We listen to the reforms. An example of this is the current contract. The association and the city met and they reformed healthcare to curb costs for the city. And it's working right now. Collective bargaining is recognized as a tool all over. The chief, the mayor, they've all come out and said that they agree that collective bargaining is a good thing.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, too.
Thank you.
James, you get the same question. What does collective bargaining mean to SAPOA, and why do they want to keep it the way it is?
Well, you know, voting yes on Proposition B is going to move us to a system that every other large Texas municipality has, right? They all have meet and confer, and they all have the same, benefits, pay, and you actually see in Austin, they actually have better pay, better benefits, and they have a meet and confer system. So we see that under meet and confer, police are still able to get great benefits, great wages. They're still able to have great working conditions. We still can attract great officers to the city as they do. They have more officers per capita. And what's really important to remember is the distinction between San Antonio and those other cities when it comes to collective bargaining is the fact that we have the highest rehire rate of fired officers in the nation. In the nation, 70% of fired officers get their jobs back through an appeal process here. That's outrageous. And so that's what sets us apart here in San Antonio. And by voting yes on Proposition B, we're making sure that we can create a system that removes the barriers that are in the contract, gives citizens a final voice. Citizens will be able to vote on the contract under a meet and confer system. That gives them a final voice if the city or if the police union is not reaching a negotiation or they have sold out certain parts of discipline that we really need, civilian oversight, the evergreen clause. That's a very key part. Having a democratic power, having civilian input at the end of this process is what meet and confer is. And we think that every citizen should have that opportunity under meet and confer.
We will get into some of the statistics that you posed as well, because I'm guessing, Rachel, you would like to take issue with some of those. So we will get into those as this discussion goes on. Iris?
Well, and Andy, as these negotiations that we're talking about getting rid of are actually happening right now. There's a meeting tomorrow that I will be at. I'm wondering, so what are the city's top priorities through this collective bargaining process this time around?
Well, this time around, as articulated by our city council, our priorities is to getting some reform in terms of our disciplinary process. That remains our top priority. Obviously, though, also with the union, we're looking at operational issues. We're looking at compensation. We're looking at health care. But as the city council pretty clearly stated, our top priority is getting some of the reforms we need in terms of the disciplinary process.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how likely do you think it would be? The union has said that they would like to get a contract before the election. Do you think that that's likely?
We have made slow and steady progress in the discussions. I mean, there has been no breakthroughs. Mm-hmm. I do have to say that the nature of the discussions have been very professional, very focused, and that's, I think, attributable to both negotiating parties. So it would be a challenge or a stretch, maybe, to say we'll be able to do it by that time frame, but there's always a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to move on now to our next question. And James, I'm going to ask you this question first. What are the goals for Fix SAPD, and what would it mean if they succeed?
Well, voting yes for Proposition B has always been about police accountability. You know, we listened to the chief of police here when he said that clear and final consequences is how you get police accountability, right? Our focus has always been driven by the changes that the chief has wanted to see. And we know that at this moment, not all of the issues are being addressed at the negotiation table. You know, Fix SAPD laid out 10 different issues that needed to be addressed, all the way from the 180-day statute of limitation that brought Matthew Luckhurst, the man who gave a feces sandwich to a homeless man, right? That was how he came back. We also want to be working on how much evidence they get access to. We want to make sure that this system is working and we're addressing all of the issues. We haven't even talked about civilian oversight. We haven't even talked about the 8-year evergreen clause that completely takes the leverage out of the hands of citizens. And so when we are seeing this process moving forward, we want to give San Antonians a final voice, a final vote on this contract, if not all of these issues are being met, as they aren't right now. And I want to say one last thing, is that right now there are subcommittee meetings going on behind closed doors about one of the most important issues, arbitration. If the chief's will is going to be overturned by an arbitrator, that should not be happening behind closed doors. That is inappropriate. Every citizen should know what is happening there, how they're coming to those deals. And if we were under a meet and confer system, we could say if they came to a deal in 2 months, well, we could vote it out. So voting yes for Proposition B is about giving San Antonians a voice, getting rid of those barriers to accountability so we can get rid of the few bad apples that are there, and making sure this is never going to be taking a dime out of the city budget. Right? This has nothing to do with that. This is focused on police accountability.
Rachel, what do you think the goals are for Fix SAPD, and what would it mean if they succeed?
The goals for Fix SAPD are absolutely clear. It's to defund and dismantle the police department. By taking away the contract, you're taking away structures that we have built into the contract. Things like command staff, promotions, training. These things all are together to make the San Antonio Police Department, and all that would disappear, and we would move to a different set of rules to play by. And defunding, all the benefits that we have built in, the wages and everything else, those are going away too. That is defunding. And when we talk about the other things that he addressed, we are addressing them at the table right now. We have proposed a discipline change to many of those things, including the 180-day rule. When we talk about Luckhurst, like he brought up, that officer never returned to the department. Once he was fired and he went through arbitration, he had 2 indefinite suspensions. Yes, the arbitrator decided one way on the first one because of the 180-day rule, but he was subsequently fired for the second one. He never put on a uniform. He never went back to work. And as a matter of fact, officers are the ones that brought that to the attention of their supervisors that this was going on. Officers don't want to work with people who have those kind of things happening in their lives. Also, I want to address a few other things. It is defunding because officers count on their stability at work. They count on the benefits that they receive. And when all of that goes away, our officers could potentially start going away.
And actually, defunding is the next question that we're going to talk about. So maybe we should ask the question. And,
okay.
And I sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want to ruin our next question before we get to it. So Iris, I know you have the next question.
Yeah, no, I think we've already fairly well dived into the union's perception of the defunding the police, but I wanted to ask Andy quickly, like, would the repeal of Prop B take money away from the police department, and would wages and healthcare benefits disappear for police officers?
I think disappear may be too strong a word, although I do agree with Rachel. There's certain things that are in the collective bargaining agreement that no longer would be required from the city. But that being said, just like any other city department, we recognize that we need to recruit, retain our best employees, whether they be with the legal department, the finance department, the police department, the fire department. So I would imagine we would maintain competitive compensation, competitive health programs, just like we would for any other city employee.
Well, and I didn't want to interrupt you, Rachel, if you had another point to add.
It's nice to hear that from the city, but the fact of the matter is that's not a given. We contract for these things for a reason. And you've seen how long our contract negotiations have gone on in the past. It's a back and forth. So to believe that we would have the same compensation, I think would be naive. And I just want to address the fact that you believe that meet and confer is actually going to change anything is mistaken. So meet and confer, if we even went to meet and confer, because it's not a guarantee, we would be eligible if they did repeal it. But in reality, it's not a guarantee. And meet and confer is just another agreement, and it's a contract. So in essence, what's actually going to happen is we would lose one contract in the framework that we have. And then we would have to struggle as a department to understand how we're going to operate as a department under a different set of rules. And then if we were to get meet and confer, we would start from ground zero trying to build another contract. And that contract can have the exact same things in it that our contract does now. And all of that is going to put SAPD behind the curve. We have been recognized. In 2016, the Department of Justice recognized us as one of the best departments and a model department when other major cities were getting consent decrees because they weren't doing their job. But they held us up along with 15 other departments, ours being the largest department. So we've been recognized, and why would we want to destroy a department for reforms that they want in discipline? If they actually wanted reforms, collective bargaining is the way to get those reforms. And it's the faster, more efficient way to get those reforms. We've been talking about them at the table already. We've come to agreement on a lot of things that the city has asked us to look into, which is the 180-day rule, the 48-hour rule, discipline being able to be used in arbitration. All these things we're already addressing, and we can have in a contract when we get the new contract. But if we go to something like meet and confer, we're not going to have any of that. Who knows how many years it would take us to get back to what we have.
Well, and we'll save a little bit more of a meet and confer discussion for later. But James, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Fix SAPD and its end goal. Is it to ultimately defund the police?
No, it's not to defund the police. This is not going to take a penny out of the police budget. It's not going to touch the city budget. And you can actually ask Danny Diaz, who went on the Puro Politics podcast and the Express News, and he even said this isn't going to touch the police department's budget. It's not going to touch the city's budget. It's not taking a penny out of it. So they recognize that this isn't going to affect the budget. This isn't defunding. So the question then becomes why? Why use this word? Well, the polling shows that right now, this is a toss-up, right? We are in a toss-up with Proposition B. We are hearing a lot of great news, but they know that the word defund scares people. They know right now that the polling shows that defund is not something San Antonians want, and they are doing their best to tie it. Because Danny Diaz knows, we know, everybody knows, this is not defund. You know, when we're talking about what's happening at the negotiation tables, Sergeant Barnes talked about all of the things being discussed. Trust me, I watch them every time. They're 4 hours long. It's a lot of time to be watching them. There are only 6 of the 10 issues addressed by Fix SAPD that are being brought up by the city. Good, not enough, but good. The issue is the San Antonio Police Union has only met at one of those. Right now, they still want an arbitration system that would bring back officers like Emmanuel Keith, who told his mistress, I'm going to string you up and choke the life out of you. That officer should never have come back. The chief of police recognizes that officer should have never come back. The system they want to keep, that they're fighting for, would bring that officer back. So there are issues in this contract, in the negotiations, that the city's pushing for, and the police union doesn't want to give on. even though we know, yes, San Antonio Police Department is amazing. The men and women who serve this city are incredible. They deserve great wages. They deserve great benefits, great health care. Of course they do. But to suggest that repealing 174 is going to miraculously change everything, given that Houston, Fort Worth have the same level. You can ask Mr. Segovia. There was a city study actually done showing the pay and compensation benefits. You can find that on their website. It shows that Houston and Fort Worth have the same pay, same benefits. Austin has better. And you know why? It's because they gave on their contract. You can ask the Austin Police Union's president. He even says, we gave on discipline. We gave them, open files. We gave them a stronger civilian oversight system. And we got better pay and better benefits from it under a meet and confer system. So this has nothing to do with defunding. This has nothing to do with hurting San Antonio Police Department officers. One more thing I wanted to say that Sergeant Barnes had mentioned was that officers turned Matthew Luckhurst in. What does that say to those officers when he gets his job back under a technicality? What does that tell them when they are working so hard to be good officers? I grew up under a lieutenant commander of the Coast Guard. I know what it means. I know what it means when you are serving your community and you do not meet those standards, and those officers come back. And so I'm here to say vote yes for Proposition B, because it gives San Antonians a greater voice over this contract. If these issues aren't being addressed at the table, and make sure that we're going to have a greater civilian oversight, we're still going to have great wages, great benefits for our officers. The city is ready, and we're going to make sure that it's not going to take a dime out of the police budget.
James, I want to ask you a question. On Tuesday, the San Antonio Police Officers Association held a news conference to announce that SAPD held video evidence showing how voters who support the police were being intimidated by those who appear to be working on behalf of Fix SAPD. Your thoughts on those allegations?
Well, first off, we don't teach our volunteers or our paid canvassers to go out and steal. This is not what we do. This is completely false. If you ever want to learn more, if anybody ever wants to learn more, they can obviously come to a training. We have them Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. They can see what we are talking about. But these allegations coming, they're a threat. They're intimidation, and they follow the Ron DeLorde playbook by the T. There was already discussions on David Martin Davies' show on TPR talking about the Ron DeLorde playbook for police unions. And one of those is smear your enemies. They're doing that with this defund language. Smear your enemies. Put that out there. I would know. I've been on their social media as an anti-police activist with my image. I've been there. I know what it means to feel intimidated by this police union. But also to suggest that you want the DA, a police union wants the DA to prosecute a group of civilians fighting for police accountability. This is not who San Antonians are. This does not reflect our values. And to behave in such a manner is completely outside of who we are as San Antonians. And I hope San Antonians recognize that by voting yes on Proposition B.
Thank you, James. Rachel, your response to, you're obviously part of the San Antonio Police Officers Association. I'm sure you knew that news conference was going to take place on Tuesday. I'm guessing you see this much differently than James.
Yes, this is definitely not a smear campaign. It's not intimidation. There are police reports to back these things up. There are videos out there to back these things up. They're actually happening. So to believe it's intimidation, it's actually the reverse. It looks like Fix SAPD is trying to hurt those who want to support our side and vote against Proposition B. We have no reports on our side. There are no reports of officers or citizens that have been harassing Fix SAPD. They like to claim that. That is not true. There's no reports. There's no IA claims. There's nothing. But we do have reports coming in from their side and their side harassing people, which is completely uncalled for. And let's go back to Austin if we want to talk about Austin. Austin is one of those cities that chose to defund their department. And look what's going on there. There's multiple articles, not just Austin, but other cities who have defunded. And they are losing their officers. They cannot keep their officers. They cannot get new officers there. Not only that, but their crime rates are skyrocketing. Their homicide rates alone are exceeding the national average. So what he's proposing to do is going to hurt the San Antonio Police Department. It is going to hurt San Antonio. We're going to be in the same boat. Officers are going to leave here too. And yes, if you want to call it dismantling instead of defunding the police department, that's what it is. You're going to dismantle everything that we've already built here. And we have a city scientific survey that was just put out. And we're proud to say that the citizens like us here in San Antonio. They feel safe in their communities. It's overwhelming, the response that we got, that they actually like what SAPD is doing. And we're proud of that because that's what we work for. And not only did they say that in the survey, but they're asking for more officers in their neighborhoods. They want more training for us. They want to see us out there, and they want us to be supportive of the community like we want to be. And that's just not going to happen when you have Proposition B out there, because you're going to take away everything that makes officers come to San Antonio and stay in San Antonio for their career so that they can work for this community, the community that they love.
Well,
real quick comment.
Let me just clarify something really quick. I was at that press conference, and to be clear, there wasn't any evidence that a Fix SAPD representative perpetrated the theft of signs or anything. There wasn't clear, definitive evidence of that. There may be cases open, but I just wanted to make that clear.
I think they acknowledged the fact that they didn't specifically know that it was Fix SAPD. It was Fix SAPD volunteer that was harassing a voter that didn't agree with them. That's absolutely correct. Okay. But when it comes to the signs, it's clear that it's people who support their position on Prop B.
Sure, but can we cut through this a little bit? But these kind of seem like very back and forth, smaller attacks on each other. Like, isn't it better worth your time to be talking about the merits of these issues than talking about who's taking whose signs from what yards?
Well, we're always talking about the merits. I mean, Fix SAPD is always out there in the community, reaching out to community members to have these conversations. We're not the one holding press conferences asking the district attorney.
Always is a strong word, though.
Always is a very strong
always
word.
Is a strong word. I mean, we are always going out into the community, having conversations with individuals. This has never been a smear campaign. The way that saying that our individuals are stealing signs, people who support us, with grainy footage. I really want to go back and hit on this really important point, because crime is rising everywhere. It's rising everywhere because there's a pandemic happening. To make a correlation for the idea that Proposition B will lead to greater crime, it'll lead to slower response times. These are things you will hear. And I'm going to kind of just throw the skunk in the jury box right now and say those are not things that are going to happen. They're scare tactics. They follow the police union's playbook.
Well, and let's get into some of the allegations that have been made on both sides when we're talking about, for lack of a better word, disinformation. Is this the best way to plead your case on this entire thing? Is it possible to hold the fact that you can be in support of the San Antonio police officers and still want more accountability? Can somebody hold both of those things? Because we've done Fairfax KSAT San Antonio report polls where people support the police department. They love the San Antonio Police Department, but they also are concerned that there's not enough accountability and transparency. Can both of those things exist, Rachel?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we're working with the city right now on discipline reforms. We are listening to the community and we understand where they're coming from. And we've made proposals to address the things that they're talking about. So I absolutely think that we can continue with our collective bargaining because that's what it's there for. It's there to quickly make these reforms that the community needs to feel safe and secure in their police department. And we're working towards that. That's all we want, is for us as an association and us representing the officers, that we can come to an agreement with the city that benefits not only us, but the community as a whole. And I believe that the city is also interested in doing the same thing.
You just think the negotiating table is the place to make this happen?
It's absolutely. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. Obviously, the chief of the San Antonio Police Department and the mayor think that collective bargaining is the real tool. Why would we want to start all over again? If we were to lose the election, then we would go to rules that we can't bargain over. there would be no way for us to reach any kind of agreement because the agreement wouldn't be recognized. So if we're under a set of rules that we can't agree to change, then there is not going to be reform. I know he keeps saying that there's going to be meet and confer, but that's not a guarantee, and that's not something that's going to happen immediately.
Well, and James, I will concede that when you look at Twitter, most of the feed, the disinformation out there seems to come from the union side, if you consider defunding and some of those things disinformation. But there's also been allegations that have been made by activists in favor of Proposition B, calling the San Antonio Police Department corrupt, calling officers corrupt on the other side. I mean, I have seen no evidence of that. I mean, I don't think anybody's getting a kickback from a feces sandwich. So, I mean, how do you answer those allegations that have been made that there's no evidence for?
That there's no evidence for from our side?
Widespread corruption within the San Antonio Police Department.
Well, there isn't, right? I'm going to say as Fix SAPD, there isn't, right? That's not what's happening here. There's an issue in the contract that's happening. And there's not an equal seating at the table for civilians when it comes to that contract. They can talk about the negotiation table all they want, but there are closed-door subcommittee meetings happening right now. But it's important to remember that Fairfax poll, there are many polls showing how great the San Antonio Police Department is because we respect that department. We do. But San Antonians also recognize a very important issue. 58% of San Antonians believe that the police union has been a barrier to holding officers accountable. That is something that we are addressing right now. If 58% of San Antonians believe that the police union is being a barrier, it's because of what's happening right now at the negotiation table. We have to make sure that we are giving San Antonians a voice if they are recognizing that problem. I mean, that's the real question with Proposition B. The real question, that language that we read, it's muddy. It's muddy water. It was made that way. But what you're really getting down to, and when we explain this to everybody on the ground, that this is about holding officers accountable, keeping good officers safe, and making sure that backdoor deals aren't happening where civilians can't see it, and making sure that the police union's barriers to accountability, Sergeant Barnes can reference all day long 180-day rule, but they've only met on one of the issues. That's the 24-hour rule.
What's your definition of backdoor deals?
Backdoor deals.
Because I'm going to ask you that question too, Rachel. I mean, are there backdoor deals that are happening? I mean, that's a strong allegation for him to make against what's happening between the city of San Antonio and the San Antonio Police Officers Association.
I think that Andy,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
can you describe
you define it for me first.
Yeah.
It means civilians don't have a seat at the table. And it's about having a seat at the table over this most important issue of arbitration. What I mean is, I don't know what's happening back there. I don't know why it has to be secret. Why can't we know what's going on? Why can't civilians have a seat at the door and a seat at the table? We can't even get through this door in order to know what's happening. If we want to have an accountable system, we have to be voting yes on Proposition B because citizens should have the final vote on a contract if these types of negotiations are going on, because we don't know what's happening, how it's happening, and we should have the final say. And it's very important that civilians are given that power.
But your representatives on the city council and the mayor have that.
And I'd like to add not only that, but the contract is posted for comment before they even vote on it. So the citizens and the residents of San Antonio do.
Oh, and Mr. City Attorney, I'm going to turn to you when there's an allegation of backdoor deals between the city and SAPOA. I mean,
absolutely. There are no backdoor deals, Steve. What happens is we have all of our negotiation sessions are telecast. They're open to the public. You can go onto our website. What we do have is a subcommittee structure in which if we have particular issues that need some deeper dives or analysis, we have subcommittees that are composed of no more than 3 members from each of the negotiating teams. They delve into the tough issues with the objective of trying to reach some accommodation or some breakthrough. And guess what? When those are done, they come back to the open televised session and they report out as to what happened. And I agree with you. Ultimately, it's the city council that votes on whether they're going to accept an agreement or not. So I think we have all the transparency that's not only required by law, but we're very transparent in terms of what we're doing.
Can we get notes from those discussions? Are there a way for us to get notes?
They report out on the discussions at the general session. as to what happens in those discussions.
So we can't get any video or anything of that?
No.
So let's move on. We got a lot of questions we want to get to, and I want to get to this. This one's kind of like where voters stand on this whole thing. And James, you talked about it a little bit. Fairfax released data just 2 days ago to get an idea of where voters stand on a number of issues, including how they feel about Prop B. Let's bring up a graphic now showing these numbers. According to Fairfax, 34% are for the proposition, 39% are against it. The majority of those definitely against Prop B. And 28% are undecided. That's a huge number. Among voters of color, 36% are in favor of Prop B, while 38.5% are against it. Rachel, I'm going to let you answer this question first. Your thoughts on where the voters stand after hearing these numbers and what needs to be done to clarify?
I think what we're doing here tonight is really what it's going to take. Because as you pointed out, the proposition is slightly confusing. The bare bones of it is 174 gives us the ability to meet and collectively bargain for these things. And by voting against it, that means you're allowing the union to continue to bargain and get the reforms that you're asking for. So I think this forum is really what the public needs, not only to decide, but also to make sure that their decision is the correct decision for them and their communities. Because like I said, contracting like we're doing right now at the table, we're making progress. You heard Mr. Segovia say we're making steady progress at every single meeting. This is the place we're going to get the reforms you're asking for. If you vote against Proposition B, we're going to be sure to keep working to get those reforms. If we lose this election, I can't tell you when those reforms are going to get here, because like I said, we'll end up under a set of rules that we aren't allowed to make any kind of agreements or any kind of contracts that can supersede those rules.
James, how do you feel about these Fairfax numbers? I mean, it's a very tight race, but when you see 28% are undecided, that means they're either confused or they're not paying attention, or, you know, how do you cut through that?
Yeah, I mean, the language is confusing.
Yes.
Right? The language is very confusing. But the number that we have been focusing on and that we remember is that 58% of San Antonians believe that the police union has been a barrier to holding officers accountable. That is striking. And that is a number to remember. Because as we're going through these negotiations, like I keep saying, it is important to remember that these issues have not been voluntarily given up by the union. And they are still being fought for, these issues that bring officers back. I do want to nip in the bud this idea that the contract cannot supersede. 143 meet and confers contract does supersede. You can use that contract to create a stronger civilian oversight system, one that has no teeth here. And you can create stronger reforms. So this idea that meet and confer contracts can't supersede, that's actually just not true.
And we're going to get into the concept of meet and confer coming up.
But we really at this point need to address this 70%, because this is atrocious and this has been flying around. And I know, Iris, you wrote a story that actually corrected the numbers. 70% is outrageous. That is not correct. It's absolutely false, and they keep pushing this narrative that is misleading San Antonio. We had 11 officers returned from arbitration from 2010 to January of 2021. That's it. That's 11 officers out of 61 terminations. That's 18%. Nowhere near the 70%. And I don't care which way you look at the numbers, 70% is absolutely incorrect. It was 11 officers, it was 18%. And the fact that they put this out on flyers, not only do they put it out on flyers, they put it out on flyers with the chief on their flyers. They've been issued multiple cease and desist letters to take the chief off their flyers because he does not support them, but they have yet to do it.
And we're going to talk about that 70% number coming up, as well. All right. There's a lot we want to get to while we still have time in our 1 hour debate about Proposition B, including how police punish their own, how some of the officers make it back to continue their police careers, some of that 70%. Also, we'll explain the systems that are used in other cities, and if San Antonio could see something like that happening here. We'll also look at some of the technical details that make this such a hot topic, and what are the lasting impacts on Proposition B, whether it passes or not. Before we get to that, myself and photographer Dale Keller went to the streets, went out to the community to hear what our viewers and potential voters think about this subject. Take a look. you're sitting in front of members of the police union and members of Fix SAPD. What's the question that you ask?
Why don't you do a better job of policing your own? Because right now the entire police department has a black eye. And I know a lot of San Antonio police officers. They are very nice people. So we have a few people who have just marred the reputation of an entire force.
You know, I don't believe in defunding police at all. Without police, you know, we wouldn't have anything. But like I said, as far as the politics and the ins and outs, I don't really know what to believe or where to start, because I know it's more than what's put out there.
I think the unions have and I'm a pro-union person generally, but I think they have a stranglehold on the budget. The police and the fire unions both.
So you think that something needs to be done?
I totally think something needs to be done.
Well, people are voting because they think, okay, this is to fix SAPD. We're going to fix the police department. What are you fixing? And how are you going to fix it? I think the key word is accountability. So everyone is wanting some sort of accountability for the police officers. And I think you may even have police officers that want that. Everyone wants accountability. But how are you going to provide accountability?
It's always good that they're trying to better themselves, the police. There should be more communication with them. People should respect them. I mean, that's all I can say, is that people should respect the police. They're up and around every day protecting us, putting their lives in danger. And then people don't respect them. It just makes me sick. Because, you know, I have a lot of respect and love for the police.
So much of this discussion is about accountability. It is about transparency. In the last several years, there have been high-profile cases of officers who seem to cross the line, getting their jobs back, whether it's serving a homeless man a feces sandwich or challenging a handcuffed suspect to a fight. Is the fact that fire officers who appeal get their jobs back at a 70% rate, is what the Washington Post said, from the years, I believe it was 2000, what was it, 2006 to 2017. What should officer accountability look like, Sergeant Rachel?
We do have officer accountability, and those numbers that were reported in that news article are absolutely false. I've reported the accurate numbers. Those numbers are available from the department, and they'll show you that it's been 11, which is the most updated one because I've gone through 2021. It's 11 officers. It's 18%. We are holding our officers accountable. And in fact, in arbitration, the arbitrator upholds the chief's decision a majority of the time. It's not the arbitrator who is sending all these officers back. He's upholding what the chief has already decided. There are cases there where the arbitrator has made certain decisions that aren't the decisions that the chief made. But the reason that we have an arbitration system is it's because it's a third-party neutral person who's going to hear the entire case. And that entire case means that the officer gets to put on their case too. And there's nowhere else in the process where the officer gets to do that. So when they get to arbitration, they get to put on their case. They can present their evidence. They can talk to their witnesses. They can cross-examine witnesses. Unfortunately, what happens is, you know, in the media age, there's not a lot of information about these cases that actually go out. So when we have a third-party arbitrator, they hear the entire case and they make their decisions. All the decisions are online. Everyone can go to the city website and read them. Each arbitrator that made these decisions have outlined why they made the decisions. They're not arbitrary. They're for reasons that these officers have come back, and that's what the system is designed to do, to make sure that the officer has their voice and due process is part of the process.
But you're not saying right now that the system is perfect, are you?
No, and that is why we've gone to the bargaining table and we've made the proposal. One, for the 180-day rule. We've now proposed that the IA investigation needs to be completed within 180 days of discovery from major misconduct, which would correct the Luckhurst situation, and that would never happen here again. We've corrected the 48-hour rule. The 48-hour rule is basically notice to the officer that they have to appear because they have an allegation against them. We've proposed a reasonable amount of time for that officer to get to internal affairs with a representation, to correct that 48-hour rule. We've also proposed that the arbitration hearing, the arbitrator can hear all prior relevant discipline as opposed to not being able to hear certain things. And that's corrected another issue that people have brought up. We've lengthened the time that IA has to interview people in IA. And when it comes to the evidence, I just want to make it clear that officers do not see the evidence before they go in for their interview with Internal Affairs. They're told there's an allegation. When they appear there, it's an administrative process. It is not a criminal process. It is an administrative process, so they are able to see what evidence is there for the administrative process. The criminal process is completely different. If an officer is accused of a crime, he goes through the same criminal investigation that any other person would. They don't see the evidence, nothing like that happens.
I understand what you're saying, and when we were talking about the numbers, we're talking about the 70% and how the Washington Post came up with those numbers. It's my understanding they also included officers who appeared and were put back on the force by the chief, and oftentimes that's done because, in my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, and City Attorney Segovia, I'll ask you on this too, that sometimes the process just is so drawn out and so expensive for the city that they just kind of throw their hands up, for lack of a better word, and bring an officer back.
That would never be the case. The chief is not going to bring back an unsafe officer because it's too hard to go to arbitration. I'm sure the chief has his own reasons for bringing those officers back. They often come back under certain agreements. So you're saying he just changes his mind? I don't know why the chief made those decisions, but I know that that's not an arbitration process. That is the chief deciding that those 20 officers need to come back. I'm not going to stand up here and say that the chief would bring back an unsafe officer just because he didn't want to send him to arbitration.
It's all on the context, right? And depending on what the infraction was, how many years that officer has, what our chances are in arbitration. So all that is considered. And I do want to address the need for reform, though, because whether it's 70% or 11 officers, that's 11 too many. And we have all examples of officers that have engaged in egregious behavior that the community absolutely don't want to be having those individuals wearing police uniforms again. And so that shouldn't be up to an arbitrator. That should be up to the police chief as to whether they come back or not.
James, I want to let you weigh in on this.
Yeah. Voting yes on Proposition B is getting rid of, these few bad apples the first time. That's what we want to do. We want to give the chief the ability to get rid of this the first time. And it is a few bad apples. I think it's very important to recognize that we have a police department that's over 2,000 men and women serving this department. And it averages about 7 a year if you're going by the 2010 to the 2021 numbers, right? We also use the Washington Post numbers, but if we're also going by that, it's about 7 a year. So it's a few bad apples. But if we are outlining this system, we really need to know how this system is working. And right now, arbitration is a coin toss. It's 11 out of 23 arbitrations in the last 10 years. That's the number. That's a coin toss. That's a 50-50 chance that the chief is going to be successful on terminating an officer. What does that say? A coin toss. And when that officer comes back, they're going to get back pay. Just look at Joseph Salvaggio. He got $500,000 with his back pay when he came back. That's taxpayer money for these officers coming back. It's also important to remember that the chief is recognizing that if I settle with these officers, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, Steve, because it is the settlements as well. If I settle with these officers, I can make sure that they're not getting this expansive back pay. I can make sure that they're being trained under my guidance, that they're not being brought back under an arbitrator's terms. This is about giving the chief the ability to appropriately discipline these officers. And to suggest that the system is, somewhat close, or this is exactly what we're needing, or we just need a little bit of tweaks here and there. What the police union is proposing is a system that would bring back officers like Matthew Belver or Lee Rakin, officers that have been fired. Lee Rakin's case, he called a Bexar County Sheriff's officer, a racial slur as a Mexican American. He lost his job 6 times, got them back 5 times, and was forced to retire that last time. It's very important to remember that if I was the chief, or if all of us were the chief, taking a 50-50 stance is not where we need to be. And the police union is continuing to fight for that system for no reason.
Yeah, James, we've got a lot of numbers that we've got to get to. And the next two numbers are 143 and 174.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let Iris dive into this one.
Sure. And maybe it'll be helpful for Andy to start us off on this one. So if Fix SAPD is successful the law would essentially snap back to provisions under 143, which is the civil service.
That's correct. And Iris, right. For the public, 143 is the civil service statute for police and fire. So there's a framework there that we would fall back on, and it talks about a lot of things that we're talking about here. It talks about disciplinary process. It talks about promotions. It talks about pay, but not to the extent to which we have certain features and elements in our collective bargaining agreement. That, in many instances, either overrides 143 or supplements 143. But to answer your question, yes, if 174 goes away, we can fall back on 143 if we don't have a collective bargaining agreement in place.
Right, and doesn't 143 have many of the problematic rules that Fix SAPD and even the city have said they would rather not have?
That's correct. It has the 180-day rule we want to change. It has the same disciplinary process that we want to change.
We're running out of time, unfortunately. What I really want to do at the end here is give each of you 1 minute to make your case directly to the voters. Don't worry about Iris and I. We're going to get to that in a minute. But when we talk about meet and confer, what does that mean to you, Rachel?
Meet and confer is another way to have an agreement and to have a contract. But to me, that means we would start from ground zero. We wouldn't have any of the things we have in this contract, and that would push us back years to get to. Not to mention the fact that meet and confer takes a process before the city council that they have to approve before it's even part of what we use. So it's not a guaranteed system. We would absolutely be under 143 if we were to lose the election. I urge you, vote against Proposition B. A vote against Proposition B will allow us to continue to serve you the way that you have believed that you need to be served, not to mention the fact that it allows us to make the reforms you want. And we've already started the process. We continue the process. And every time we meet, we're making a little bit further.
Yeah. I want to give you a question on meet and confer. We're not doing the closing statement yet, but when I say meet and confer to you, what does that mean? What do people need to know about meet and confer?
It means we, the people, get a final voice over a contract. It means we get the final say over a contract. It means we still have great wages, great benefits, because cities with meet and confer still have that. These contracts can have superseding provisions. They can still work out these issues. We can still do everything the city and the police union has come together and more. We can have an accountable police system. We can lower these barriers that the police union is still fighting for. We can make sure that we have strong civilian oversight system. And of course, this isn't taking a dime from the police budget. So it's always important to remember that we are giving San Antonians the final voice in a contract because we deserve a seat at the table as we the people. And right now, we don't have that. And right now, our priorities are not being met. They haven't been met. They told us 4 years ago, this is how we're going to do it. We wanted more. They still haven't pushed for that. The city hasn't pushed for everything. The police union has only given on a few things. Not even enough on arbitration, which is the main issue that affects us civilians when these officers, not just us, but also the officers, like the officers that turned in Matthew Luckhurst, it affects them. So we're fighting for a system for good officers, for all of us to have a greater voice.
Can I clarify?
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I mean, is it possible in 45 seconds to explain what meet and confer is?
Meet and confer is a method to negotiate that's under several Texas statutes, but depending on which one you pick, Steve, as Rachel pointed out, either the city council has to vote to approve and engage in meet and confer, or there has to be a vote of the electorate. So it's not a default. It's not an automatic default to meet and confer if 174 is repealed.
But it can supersede 143.
Correct, it can.
Okay, great. Now we're to the final question, the final statement. And actually, since I asked Sergeant Barnes the first question, James, I'm going to let you go first. with a 1-minute statement directly to viewers. Don't worry about Iris and I. You're talking directly to the voters now. What should they know about Prop B?
Voting yes on Proposition B is about giving all of us final say, final voice over a contract that has left this city with the highest rehire rate of fired officers in the nation. San Antonians love their police department. We recognize that they deserve, always, great benefits, great pay. A meet and confer system is going to keep that, but it's going to make sure that good officers are safe on the force, that morale is high, that citizens are protected. It means we have a stronger civilian oversight system that is independent of the police union contract. It means we can have more control over what is happening when it comes to discipline, making sure that an arbitrator, an outside lawyer, isn't overturning the will of the chief, because I understand, and we all understand as Military USA, that to keep your unit safe, you need to be able to get rid of those bad apples. And that's not happening here. That isn't happening because of the police union's contracts barriers. And we are asking you to vote yes for Prop B.
Your 1 minute is up. Sergeant Rachel Barnes.
I would take this opportunity now to urge you to vote against Proposition B. Fix SAPD has been dishonest with you, San Antonio. They keep pushing out numbers and information that's absolutely incorrect. I've corrected some of them here tonight. Their objective, to be clear, is to defund and dismantle the police department. They want to bring down the police department. Collective bargaining is the best way to create the reforms and the change that you want to see. Collective bargaining is where we can come together with the city, and we are coming together with the city. We've made proposals that make the corrections that you're looking for, and we want to continue that process. The process isn't over, nothing's been decided, and we continue to negotiate. Both the mayor and the chief have said that collective bargaining is a good thing. It is the tool that allows us to be able to have a great police department. It's the tool that allows us to serve the community so they have safe streets. And we can give you 27 support. We're proud that the community feels safe.
And we
urge you to vote against Proposition B.
Time is up. Prop B will be a hot topic throughout this month, all the way up until Election Day, which is May 1st. Early voting begins Monday, April 19th. Back at the KSAT 12 studio, we're preparing for more in-depth coverage, including a KSAT Explains episode. In less than 2 weeks, the KSAT Explains team will have the latest updates and information, so you have everything you need to know before you go and vote. That episode is out April 20th. Of course, you can find more info online at ksat.com/vote and at the sanantonioreport.org page. Make sure to check them both out. I would like to thank Sergeant Rachel Barnes from the San Antonio Police Department and SAPOA for taking part in this debate, James Dykman from the Fix SAPD group for taking part in this debate, and City Attorney Andy Segovia for also taking part in this debate. I also want to thank the KSAT 12 team that makes productions like this possible. I want to thank Iris Dimmick and the San Antonio Report for all they do. But I really hope that the viewers who have taken attention, who are paying attention to this issue tonight, really realize just how important and necessary your vote is. You really will be deciding the future of policing in San Antonio. For all of us here at KSAT 12, I'm Steve Spriester. Good night from Laurie Auditorium.